Well, welcome everyone to this webinar. We are going to be showing you the basics of Luminar, and Abba Shapiro is our host today. He is our senior product trainer, and I know you folks are going to really enjoy this. So sit back and relax. We're going to take you on a journey through Luminar from start to finish, and we hope that you enjoy it. So Abba, welcome, and thanks for being our host today.
Well, thank you very much, Laurie, and thank you everybody for joining us. Today I'm going to walk you through Luminar. For those who are brand new to the application, it'll give you a good grounding on how to use the application and what it can do. And for those of you who've played with it a little or have used it before, seen one of the previous webinars, hopefully you'll pick up a trick or technique that you might not be familiar with, so it'll still be valuable for your time. To get started, we're going to work with this image that I've actually was playing with prior to the webinar beginning. So this is kind of a completed one. I want you to see what the end product looks like, and then I'm going to actually step you through on how I corrected this image. So we'll start working with this one. And what I want to do is, there's a great feature in Luminar. If you look at the very top part of my screen, you can see that there's a couple of buttons up here. My mouse is up there. One looks like an eyeball and one looks like two squares with a line between them. That's the ability to either look at your original image. If I click on that, you can see this is my original image. I have some distortion there. The clouds are a little washed out. The woman is not as well lit because there was no light behind her, just in front of her from the sun. So a lot of things I want to fix. So I can look at the before and after. Now you can actually see what we've done in Luminar. It's always good to know where we're going to be targeting to get by the end of this hour. I can also look at this in a split screen if I click on the button next to it, so we can actually see pretty much what we will be doing and what has been done, correcting the aspect ratio, really bringing up the texture and the warmth on the dock, and opening up some of the details in the mountains. So this is an idea of what we're going to be doing. So that's a general overview. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to reset this back to its original state. So because I've been working on this, and I haven't saved it yet, actually I did save that, but I can go to this drop down in the upper right hand corner, which actually shows me the history of everything I did to get to this point. And it's a really nice feature because if you made a mistake and you want to go back to a certain point in time, every filter you applied, every preset, we'll look at those presets in a moment, that you may have applied, everything has been recorded, including the value of a slider on a filter. So you can always go back and see how you did something, or go back in case you made a mistake and didn't notice it. I'm going to use this to go back to the original image, so we can start processing this image from scratch as if I just brought it in. So there we are. There's my original image without any modification, any enhancements by Luminar. And just to talk about how we can bring an image in, Luminar can work with a wide variety of images. It can use camera raw images from all the main manufacturers. It can use JPEGs, TIFF files, PICT files, Photoshop documents, .psd files, and portable network graphics, PNG files. Pretty much all the main photography formats. And it's just a matter of opening it up within the application or dragging and dropping it onto the application icon, whether that's in your startup menu or your dock, that's a Mac or a PC, or if you just want to open from within the application, you can also do that from the File menu. So I've already opened up this image, and this happens to be a camera raw image. The nice thing about if you do shoot raw images, you have a little more latitude in bringing out details in your highlights and bringing up details that might have been lost in the shadows. It gives you a little bit more dynamic range than a JPEG image. I have my basic image. I want to give you an idea of the interface. So there's three basic areas of the interface once you open up the image. Of course, the center area is where the image is, and that's pretty obvious. Along the bottom are presets, which will provide you a look for your image, and there's a variety of presets available. So if I click on categories, and that's just the little button right above that film strip, I can see all the presets that are in my copy of Luminar. Now, when Luminar ships, it ships with the first 8 presets that you see on the top row and a half. Those are embedded in the program. And then we have a whole bunch of other presets that we have for free on our website that if you wanted to give something a look, we're constantly coming out with new presets for just really quick developing. Everything from above the world, if you're shooting with a drone, to I just want to make a portrait look pretty. I'm going to go over to just one of the basics just to show you what you can do. I open up this image. I'm not going to worry about the distortion now. I just want to show you how I could, with a few clicks, process this image exactly how I want to. So I could go ahead and try different ones. I could say, oh, I want to boost the clarity, and I click on the clarity booster. And this will apply a series of filters to my document, and those filters will then give it a certain look. That's image enhancer, and I can see the before and after, and it just kind of makes things pop. I could try a sky enhancer just to bring the sky forward. Maybe I want to do a black and white. So these are a variety of looks that I can very quickly apply to my image, and if it's not exactly the way I like it, I can adjust these. Every time I apply a preset, there is a slider that allows me to blend this preset with the original image. So maybe I want to bring in a little bit of color here to get that certain look. Or if I tried something where I did, say, tonal compression, that's on the far right. I click on that. I like what it's done to the image, but I think it's a little bit too much. I can go ahead and adjust how much that preset will affect my image. So every time you apply a preset, it's live and you can blend it back. Now, the nice thing about all of these presets is not only can you blend them back with the original image, but you'll notice that on the right side of my interface, that in each case of each preset, a variety of filters have appeared with certain settings. So when I click on, say, the vivid look, it really will make my image pop, and it applies several filters here. If I didn't want to just control it with my preset slider, so I'm going to take that back up to 100%, I can go over to any of these filters that were applied by this preset and adjust them. So not only is the preset as a whole live and adjustable, but everything that makes up that preset is also live. So I look at this and it's like, I like what it's done with the image, but it's a little bit too blue, it's a little bit too vivid. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to pull down the saturation because I want it to be a little more normal. And as a matter of fact, I'll talk a little bit about these filters as I adjust them, but we're going to ultimately go back and build our image from scratch without using any of the presets. But it's important to know that if you just want to get in with a couple of clicks, it's really easy to make an okay image look great with the presets. So I'm going to pull down the saturation, and I actually overdo that because there's another slider directly underneath saturation called vibrance. And vibrance is smart saturation. And what it does is if the colors are more muted, it adds saturation to them. But if they're already saturated, it leaves them alone. So the challenge with regular saturation is everything gets equally blown out. But with vibrance, it's just going to bring up the duller or less saturated colors, and I get a much more natural look. As a matter of fact, if you noticed, I actually bring the saturation below normal and then bring the color back in with my vibrance slider. So that really gave me a much better effect than the default for this image. And if I wanted to see what this slider has done, I can simply turn it on and off by itself with this little eyeball to the right of the name of the filter. So if I just click this, a small slash will appear. Don't worry, you probably won't be able to see it if you're looking at it on your phone. But this goes ahead and it turns off that color. And you can see what I've done by pulling it back is it's really, really subtle. What I've achieved here is just pulling off some of that blown out red on her cheek. So it's nice and balanced. So I can go through and I like that. The polarizing filter, another great filter that's fairly unique. And that just affects the sky. It's kind of emulating if you put a polarizing filter on the front of your camera lens, letting only part of the blue light come in, so your skies get deeper and richer. So the net effect is, if I pull it too far to the right, is my sky looks unnatural, but it does let me give a little more richness to the sky by moving that over. So that's just some examples. So I liked the preset where it started me, but I can go in and I can start processing that preset exactly the way that I like it. So that's one of the beautiful things about these presets, as well as these filters that the preset uses. Now, just because it used those 3 filters doesn't mean I can't add additional filters. And I'm going to show you how you would do that, and we're going to use the same technique to add filters from scratch. So once I've applied and kind of gotten a look that I like, I may want to tweak this a little bit. I may want to simply add a vignette to this so I can focus the viewer's eyes on the woman sitting on the dock versus the dock, which is kind of bright, or the sky, which is kind of bright. So to add any filters, I would simply go to the upper right-hand side of the interface, and there's a large blue button that says Add Filters. And when I click on that, it will reveal the 50+ filters that are available in Luminar. And they're broken down into specific areas, kind of like their work groups. It starts off with the essential filters that you might need to fix an image. Saturation and vibrance, regular developing, you'll see in a moment when I clear that. Structure, which adds detail. Toning, so I can control my blacks and my whites, as well as, there we go, with the vignette. Now, if we look further down, there's a whole bunch of other filters available, things that will fix issues, such as if you had a hazy area where you were shooting, maybe you were shooting in San Francisco, and you wanted to pull out some of that haze. There's where we found the polarizing filter, removing color cast. There's a whole variety of them, and we'll touch on some of these throughout the webinar. Obviously, we can't touch on all 50, but throughout the course of multiple webinars and our online training, we do cover all the details with all of these filters. But let's get started with going ahead and applying that vignette. I'll simply click on it. And some of you may be thinking, why are some of these orange and some are white? Well, if there is a filter I use a lot, and 2 of them are the Accent AI filters and the vignette filters, I can actually make them a favorite. So I use those a lot, and maybe I'll use saturation and vibrance. So I'm going to just move my cursor over and click on that little star. And now if I wanted to, instead of showing all of my filters, I can just say, you know what, just show me my favorites. And those are my top 4. Split color warmth is one that I also use frequently. So you have this great little drop-down menu to clean things up. If I just want to do essential filters, I can do that. If I just want to be creative, I can choose the creative filters. It just makes it easier to find things. So we're going to go back. I'm going to switch it to all because that's the default. And I'm going to click on Vignette, and it will apply the vignette at the bottom of our workflow here. So I have everything on there. And when you apply a filter, unlike when you apply a preset, it comes on without any settings adjusted. It's neutral. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring down the edge of the vignette. I'm going to actually feather it and then bring down the size. And it's like, okay, I have an idea of what it's doing. But let's really be aggressive. I'm going to bring this all the way down. I'm going to bring that feather all the way to 0. And now I can actually see what my vignette is. And so if I play with something such as the roundness, I really do want more of a round vignette than an oblong one. So I'm going to make this round, and I'm going to size it a little bit smaller. So now I know exactly where it's positioned, and I'm going to click on Place Center. And now I can actually place the center of that vignette right over her. I kind of like that, maybe a little bit higher. And now I'm going to bring back that amount in that feather. And the key with a vignette is subtlety. I want to make sure that their eye is drawn in, but they don't actually feel that the edges are getting too dark. So when applying a vignette, Usually less is more, and often you will dial back. But now I know that it's a round vignette and it's placed where I want. And maybe I'll even throw a little more of a light kick in the middle just to focus on her. And it's subtle. If I turn this off, you can see that, there's not a huge change, but the edges are a little darker, the middle's a little brighter, and that's where my eye will be focused. So if I wasn't worried about correcting the aspect ratio of that foreground, because this was a very wide angle lens, I could go ahead and I would be done with just a few clicks and a few adjustments. Now, let's talk about some of the adjustments you can do. And as a matter of fact, at this point, I'm going to start with a clean slate. I'm going to take away all of my filters and my preset and just start from scratch as I would develop this image. So I can easily do that several ways. One way is to go back into my history. There we go. And you can see there's all the presets that I was talking about. And as I applied them, it remembered. So if I say, I really loved when I was in this enhanced image, I could go ahead and click on that and go right back to that point in time. I'm going to go back to the original, and we're going to focus on just bringing in our filters from the beginning. And as a matter of fact, since I am not going to be using presets for a little bit, I'm going to hide them. I'm going to take advantage of all the real estate on my screen. And if I wanted to hide either my preset film strip or my filter panel on the right, I have a couple of buttons up here on the right-hand corner. So if I click on this one to the right, that's the side panel. I can hide that. If I just want to open this up and just throw on some presets and export my image, I'm good to go. Or if I wanted to, I could turn off the preset tab. So now I have a much larger image to work with so I can really see what's going on. So we'll do that. It'll make it easier for you as the viewer and easier for me as I'm working on my machine. So the first thing I like to do when I'm processing an image is I apply the develop filter or the raw develop filter. Now you'll locate this in the same place, and depending on the type of image you bring in, you'll have either the raw develop or the develop filter. So if you shoot raw images in your camera and you bring those in, those could be CR2 files from Canon, ARW files from Sony, NEF files, the list goes on, but those non-JPEG, non-PIC-TIFF files, you will actually see this listed as the raw develop filter. If you bring in, say, a JPEG or a TIFF, it'll just be the develop filter because it's not a raw image. So let me go ahead and I'm going to click on that, and that will apply the filter. And as you can see, the filter's there, but the image hasn't changed because all of my sliders are neutral. So I use the develop filter just to get the image to where it should be, that it's kind of a neutrally processed. The blacks are nice and rich, the whites aren't blown out, contrast is good. It's usually the first step I like to work on with an image before I start applying any presets or starting to get creative. I just want it to be fixed and neutral. So one of the first things I want to do is I want to make sure that I'm using the full range of color and luminance. So I can take my black levels and I can grab that slider. That slider is towards the bottom of the filter on the right panel, and I can bring them down to the left, and you can see my blacks are getting nice and rich. But I want to be careful that I don't make them too dark because I'm going to lose too much detail in my shadows. So I can turn on an overlay, and you can do this several ways. You can do this if you go up to the histogram, there's a couple of small triangles up here. They're kind of faint, but if you click on them, the one to the left will actually show you all the cool pixels or anything that is in the black range that's too dark. And there's one over to the right, which will show you all the hot pixels or anything that is blown out and you're losing detail. So a lot of times your original file has a lot more detail than you can see, and that's the objective of being able to control the black and white levels. So I'm going to go ahead, bring the black levels down just till I start seeing these blue. And when I see blue, it means I'm losing all the details in my shadows, but I want to make sure that my blacks are as rich as possible. So I'll just bring it down right to the edge of blue and then bring it back a little bit. And I can do the same thing with my highlights. Now here's a little trick, or I should say with my whites, is that I want to open up or brighten this image. And don't worry if it doesn't look quite right yet. We're still in the developing process. So I'm going to, my whites there are good, but I want to be able to recover the detail in the clouds, and I want to make sure she's not too dark. So I'm going to go ahead and use my highlights and shadows sliders to do that. So I can move my highlights to the left just until that red goes away. And then I can open this up with my shadows and start bringing out her detail a little bit. So it's just a matter of playing with these. Sometimes once you've adjusted the highlights or shadows, you may want to go ahead and do the black and whites. And sometimes if you look at the histogram, and I won't go deep into this, you might say, you know what, I just need to open up the image. I need to open up the exposure a little bit. And as I do that, I'll just be moving things back and forth just to make sure the image looks good. So I'm working with this, or the nuance of this image. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off those overlays. I'm going to look at my before and after. That's always important to do. So I do like the fact the image is a lot richer and deeper. I know I'm going to have to make her brighter a little bit, but I'm going to worry about that on my second pass. What I'm doing now are global adjustments, adjusting everything within the image, and then I can go back and use layers, add additional layers to adjust unique parts of the image, or local adjustments, such as if I wanted her to be a little bit brighter, I could paint that in. So I'm going to get this. The color temperature is pretty good. My foreground's about right. I shot this daylight. I could test out different settings if I wanted to. I'm going to go with daylight, but you can see it makes it a little too blue here, so I'm going to go back to as the camera saw it. So that's my first pass. It's kind of getting my image close to where I want, and now it's time to really make the image pop and to also fix that bowing. So the first thing I want to do is, after I apply the develop filter and get it to where I like to throw on the accent AI filter. And you'll find that at the top of the essentials panel in the filters panel. And this is a smart slider. Accent AI stands for artificial intelligence. And what Luminar does is it looks at your image, finds the sky, finds grass and mountains, finds people, and does selective adjustments all with one slider. So it may sharpen the mountains and the grass in the foreground. It may make the sky a little richer. It may make skin tones a little smoother. So I can bring that to the right. And depending on how far I go and what the original image is, you can see that it is starting to bring out a lot more of that detail. But if I go all the way to the right, maybe it's a little bit too much. So I really like the combination of the accent AI filter and the develop filter to start off processing my image. So this was the before, which is a little bit flat, and this is a lot richer and deeper, and now I can start manipulating it. So I'm really happy with where it's going. And let me go and show you how I would adjust this bowing from this extremely wide angle lens. As a matter of fact, if I look right above here at the very top of the interface where my filters are, you can see it actually is giving me information about my ISO and my f-stop and my focal length, which was 8.8 millimeters. So you can see this is a pretty wide angle lens. So anyways, I'm going to go ahead and click on the word lens, which is directly to the right of the word adjust underneath raw develop. I'll click on that, and it's going to show me a dialog box where I can fix some things automatically. I can click in on lens distortion, and it's going to, as you can see, automatically do some of that correction. That's it reads from the lens information. There's something called chromatic aberration, which on some lenses at the very edges, like maybe if I zoomed in here to the very top of this mountain, sometimes you see a little bit of fringing. You see a little green or purple fringing. It's just, you know, when you have a very wide angle lens or high contrast between light and dark areas, you'll sometimes see that. So I could have it automatically do that and do some defringing to fix that area. And then I can get into some very specific areas of lens distortion if it didn't get it quite enough. So I'm going to tweak that just a little bit until these feel a little straighter. And I did pick it up from an odd angle. So I like that my bars look straight. This was my before. This is my after. Able to do that with a couple of sliders. There is something called de-vignette. Now that has nothing to do with vignette in that you only use this to fix some wide angle lenses or some lenses as you get to the edges, they don't collect as much light. So they put a shadow there and that would fix that. Not a problem with this image, don't have to click every button, but I do want to go over to the next part of this filter from the lens area to the transform button, because I've fixed kind of the bowing, but it's crooked and I want to fix that distortion. And I can do that very easily with these controls. So for instance, I can move this horizontally. So I kind of want to maybe get this a little bit into the center of my image. Just tweak that a little bit. If I wanted to even the horizon, and this gets a little bit tricky in that the horizon is a little bit crooked, but the distortion from the lens is even worse. So I'm going to rotate that a little bit so that our grass is, our lake to our grass is nice and even. And then, oops, let me undo that. I clicked that button, got that wrong. And just to tweak this a little bit, I can go ahead and look at my horizontal offset, and as you can see, I'm starting to get that nice and smooth. I don't think I need to do anything with the vertical. I wasn't that low, but let's give it a try. Tweak it just a little bit. And then you'll notice I kind of lost some of my image over to the left. Well, that's where I can use that X and Y offset, and I'm going to move that over a little bit more to the center. So I could tweak this a little more. You saw in the final one, I probably could get this almost straight. Maybe not, just because of the distorted angle and wide angle that I shot it at, but this is pretty close. And then you'll see I have some areas that don't exist anymore because of the way I've bent the picture. So I could either scale that up here or I could crop that. And I'm going to fix that with a crop just so I can show you the cropping tools. But that's a quick fix. And again, this was my before, that was my after, and I can do that all in the raw develop filter that I start off with. So I'm really happy with the way we're starting here. And as I said, you'll notice there's some blank area at the bottom right-hand corner. And I think everything else I kind of hid pretty well. But if I wanted to start cropping, I could do this now. And I could simply click on crop and fill that space. So that's one of the options. I could go ahead. I could just move that up a little bit and close that in. So it's easy to fix things with a crop. I'm going to risk trying to fix this with another tool we have, which is the stamp and erase tool, which can also be the stamp and replace tool. So let me go ahead and hit done. I didn't put any kind of a crop in. And I'm ready to start now working on this image, or making this image really process the way that I want. To do that, instead of adding anything else to this layer, because I like the way it is, I'm going to add what's called an adjustment layer above it, and that adjustment layer allows me to affect the image below it selectively. So to do that, I'm going to click on a little white plus sign on the right of the screen. It says Create Layer, and when I click on that, I have some choices, and we're going to choose Add New Adjustment Layer. There's some other options there. Add new image layer. For instance, let's say I wanted to overlay some texture or maybe paint in some better clouds. I could add a new image layer and blend them together with a mask. We'll learn a little bit about masks shortly, but for now I just want to be able to tweak my image. So I'm going to say Add New Adjustment Layer. And as you can see, I now have a clean slate directly below in my filters area. Now I haven't lost everything I've done. If I click on the layer below, I can see everything that I've done, and I can still make adjustments to it. But I don't want to focus on that now. I want to focus on that next layer on top to really kind of tweak and enhance this image, to really bring it out. So the first thing I might want to do is I might want to work on the tone of the image. We worked with the black and white, so I'm going to add a toning filter. And you'll see that it does have exposure and contrast, which we saw in the develop filter, as well as the highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. That's all great. But it also has this great little feature called smart toning. Now, if I use this slider and I move it to the left, what Luminar will do is it will bring down the really bright areas, but not affect the darker or the shadowed areas. And this is great. If I had some really bright skies that I wanted to bring down, I could do that. Conversely, if I move it to the right from its original position, it's going to open up my shadows without blowing out my highlights. So as you can see, I'm going to move this to the right, and it's doing what I want. It's really opening up the girl sitting on the dock without blowing out my skies. And once again, if I want to see the before and after, at the very top of each specific filter, there's that little eyeball, and I can click it and it will temporarily deactivate it. So that's what smart tuning does. If you notice, the skies are fine, but it really opens up the luminance on the lake and on her, and it's a great way to get started. So this image is really coming along to where I like it, and we're getting a lot closer. I now want to make this image a little richer, and so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to play with a couple of other filters that I like. There's a great filter, one of the ones I mentioned earlier on was called Split Color Warmth. And one of the nice things about Luminar, it has some really unique filters that you don't find anywhere else that allow you to quickly affect your image and do something exactly the way you want it without having to use a half a dozen filters and a lot of tweaking. So in this case, I'm going to apply Split Color Warmth. And you'll notice it just has two sliders for me to deal with, or for me to play with. And when it comes to sliders and getting familiar with an application, one of the things I recommend to folks is just move them all the way to opposite ends and see what happens. Because then you get an idea of what that slider does and what that filter can do. Because you can always reset it back to 0. So you'll notice that if I move the warm slider to the left, it cools off the image. What it's doing is it's pulling out a lot of that yellow and orange in the image, and so it's becoming a lot more muted. If I move it to the right, it's warming up those areas, and as you can see, her skin's getting warmer and the dock is getting warmer, so I like that. It's really kind of adding some depth to the image. She's maybe a little too warm, and we'll show you how you can fix that, but I like what it does. And if I look at the cool filter, if I move that to the right, it kind of mutes my sky, but if I move it to the left, I can really start bringing out some detail in that. So it's a very quick way to cool off my cools, warm up my warms. I'll probably go in, I definitely will go in and tweak the areas because I don't want the mountains to be as cool and I don't want her to be as warm. But this is a nice global adjustment that I can apply to this image. So I'm getting it closer and closer to where I want. Now I want to tweak a couple of other elements. Okay, I want to go ahead and maybe I do want to fix the exposure on her. So I can go in and if I wanted to, I can add either another develop filter. Okay, and the thing about the way the filters work, when you apply a develop filter to any layer, it will always be applied at the very top. It's the first filter that you would see. Any other filter you apply is just applied at the time you click on it, so it just goes to the bottom of the list. So for instance, let's say I'm going to bring in golden hour. If I click on that, you'll notice it goes to the bottom. Now, I do want to point out that with every filter other than the develop filter, which always goes to the top, you can rearrange the order of the filters that you apply. So if, for instance, I wanted to see golden hour before split color warmth, all I have to do is grab it and bring it up, and this filter will affect the image before the following one. Sometimes the order doesn't make a difference depending on the filters, and sometimes if you've adjusted color and whatnot, it will affect downstream, as the jargon we would use, the filters below it. But the important thing to note is that the develop filter always goes to the top. And for those who've used the application a little bit, I'm going to teach you a little trick right now. I don't want the develop filter at the top. I want it actually at the bottom because I just want to isolate here. Well, I can't do that. So first I'm going to teach you how to get rid of a filter. If you don't want a filter, just hit the little X and it will be removed. And I'm going to go ahead and remove golden hour because I'm not ready for it yet. So I can go ahead and click on that to remove it. What I do want are some of the features that are normally available in the develop filter. And if I go to the very bottom of my filter choices, there's a grouping called utility. And in utility, you can actually get filters that are subsets of the develop filter, such as exposure, and there's my highlights and shadows, my white and black areas. There's additional ones also, but this is great because I can go in and I can just clean up some areas. So if I wanted to, I could just go in with exposure, and I'm going to grab the slider, and I want you to see what's going to happen. Of course, this is going to affect the entire image, okay? Which sometimes is what you want, but what I really want is just to get her back and her head a little bit brighter. So all I'm looking at is her back and her head, and that's about where I want to see it. So this is the fun part. I want to isolate what this one filter affects, and that's where I would go into doing something called masking. And with masking, I can get this little paintbrush, or I'm going to click on this. If you can see, I have a brush. I can also do a radial mask, which is a circle, or a gradient, which is really nice sometimes to go between sky and ground. But I'm going to grab the brush, and what this will allow me to do is either paint in this filter or erase parts of this filter if I want to expose them. They're basically inverses of each other. So there's my exposure. I have the brush. You'll notice in the upper left-hand corner, I have the words paint and erase, and I also have some adjustments so you can see exactly how big I want to make my brush. So I can do this all with clicks and drop downs. So make that less soft or more soft. I can also make the size and the opacity greater or lesser. If you've come from, say, Lightroom or Photoshop, you can also use keyboard shortcuts. So the bracket keys, the left and right bracket keys, which are to the right of the P key on a US keyboard, they will actually make my brush bigger and smaller, so I can be very precise with how I paint. And if I want to make that brush softer, and let's see if I can make it stand out a little bit more by putting it on her white dress. If I hold down the Shift key, that center little red ring will get smaller and bigger, and that's showing me that the brush is softer or harder. So as I paint in, I can have a natural flow. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paint in her skin area. Now, I've shown you how you can make the brush larger and smaller. If I want, I can zoom in on the image. So to zoom in on the image, if you have a scroll wheel on your mouse, you can just scroll in. Keyboard shortcuts will also work. Command or Control plus will zoom you in, and Command or Control minus will zoom you out. So I just want to get this a little bit bigger. I'm going to hold down the space bar. Now, don't worry if I'm throwing a lot of these shortcuts at you really quickly, because all of these are in the manual, and Laurie will show you that. We'd find that at the end. But I'm going to hold down the space bar, and now I can just move the image over, and now I'm ready to start painting in my exposure. So as soon as I click, did you notice the whole image got a little bit darker? And that's because that was the original luminance levels that I liked. But I'm going to just use my brush and just paint over her skin area and lighten this. And you can see it's starting to pop nicely. And then I'm going to scroll down a little bit, do the same thing to her hands. And I could be more precise, but I'm going to show you something. I'm intentionally being a little bit loose here, because sometimes you want to actually see precisely what part of the image you've painted in or erased. And if I go over here, there's a little eyeball when I'm in the masking mode to the left of where it says paint and to the right of the word mask, and it says show mask. If I click on that, I actually see red, and red indicates where my filter is being applied, my enhanced exposure. So you can see that I did pretty good in the head, but I kind of got a little sloppy here. So if I wanted to, I could go ahead and erase that. Click on the erase tool, and I'm going to make this actually much harder. I really want to just clean up the edge, and I can go here and I can just say, you know what? Be careful. Do not affect the water, because I don't want that edging to be too bright. And I can go in and paint this in. Let me go ahead and zoom out a little bit. It's close enough for quick work for the demo. So what I've done, if I go ahead and turn this filter on and off, so I'm going back over to the right side of my screen, clicking the yellow brush off. And if I click on the eyeball, I've highlighted just her. And this is starting to develop the image exactly where I want. Let me zoom back out. So that's before and that's after. And so now my eye is definitely focused, and I don't see her as being too dark. I do think she might be a little saturated. So I'm going to show you another trick and another technique. So let's say I want to desaturate just her skin tones. So I could go back up here, throw on saturation and vibrance. And by the way, you can use any filter more than once in the same layer. So I could throw in, say, the saturation to desaturate part of the image, and then another saturation and vibrance filter and saturate another area. So I have very precise control with filters and with masks. So what I want to do, and I'm just looking at her skin again, is I just want to pull down the saturation. I just think, I want it to be a little more like skin tone. Pull that down a hair. And you can see it affects the rest of my image, but I'm going to cheat. Remember, I made a mask for the luminance. It's right here. It's that little black box. If I right-click on that, I get everything I want to do to modify that mask, and all I want to do is copy it, because that is for her shoulders, her head, and her arms. I go copy, select saturation and vibrance, mask, and paste. I'm at the very bottom right-hand corner of my screen. There we go. And so now what I've done is I've lightened her skin, and I can turn that on and off again, within this layer. So this layer is really starting to come together on my image. So let's look at the whole before and after. First, if I want, I can turn off just that adjustment layer with the little eyedropper, the little eyeball. So this is my enhancements to the image. If you notice, that's all popping a little bit. And if I wanted to see the complete before, there's my before and there's my after. If I take a look at this water, and my image is nice and crisp, but I don't like my water to be crisp. In fact, I like a lot of detail. And I'm going to go ahead and I could either do this on the same layer, or I could add another layer to this. So I'm going to just, for illustrative purposes, go ahead and create another adjustment layer just for structure, just for things being soft and less soft. So I'm going to go ahead and apply one of the many filters I can to enhance the detail in my image, or in some cases de-enhance it. And if I move structure to the right, I like what it does to the dock here. It gives me some detail, but everything else is just showing a little bit too much noise and grain. So I'm going to use it for a different purpose. I'm going to use negative structure, and this is great for softening areas. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'll soften this, but I don't want to soften my whole image. But this will work great on the water. So I've softened it. I'm going to once again go ahead, choose my masking, go with the brush, make sure that I'm on paint, and I could just paint that softness right into the water. Okay, so here I'm getting a little less detail there. It's getting nice and soft. And again, if I wanted to see how sloppy I have been, I could go ahead and turn that on, and it was okay. I mean, they're not necessarily, your viewer won't necessarily be looking too deeply at this water, but there we go. Turn that off. Go ahead and let's click that. And so now I've softened that water so our eye isn't drawn to those little flecks of detail. I want to fix those mountains. They're a little bit too blue, and that's because they're far away. And the further something is from you, the more air you have to shoot through. And what happens is that air actually filters out a lot of the different temperatures of light, and blue makes it through. So everything at a great distance tends to look a little bluer. Now, to fix this, I'm going to add another adjustment layer. I'll do this by clicking on the little plus sign to the right of layers, create a new adjustment layer. Now, all I want to do is change the color temperature of the mountains. And if I scroll down to the very bottom of my filter list, there is simply a color temperature filter that I can apply. And what I want to do is I want to add a little more of that gold or yellow to my image and remove some of the blue. So I'm going to move this to the right till I feel it's just right. And let's look at around 47. That's a good number. And I don't care about what's happening to the rest of the image because I'm going to actually paint in this filter just on the mountains. And while I'm at it, let me go ahead and get rid of some of the green and add a little more red to this image. And I'll bring that up and let's just stop that around 40. So the image may not look great now, but I'm going to go ahead and leverage this filter by painting it in the exact location where I want, and that's on these mountains. So once again, I'll click the little brush to activate that. I'm going to select paint and paint over exactly where I want the mountains to change colors. Now I'm going to be a little bit sloppy here because I don't want to waste a lot of your time, but as you can see, I can simply paint in and the mountains are going to change color exactly where I want. And if I overshoot a little bit, I can always go and switch to the erase tool, and I can simply click on the erase tool just like we did before and just go ahead and make sure I don't change any of the color of the sky. But as you can see, I can pretty easily change the colors of these mountains, and this is it before, and I'm going to click on the little eyeball to the right of color temperature, and this is it after. And just because I'm a little bit picky, I am going to fix a couple spots here. I'll just go ahead, make sure that I'm in the painting mode, and paint the edge right in and tint that. So we're getting close to where I like this image. There's just a couple of other things that I want to do to this image to fix it up. I'm going to hit the X key, by the way, and just erase that. Not be the perfectionist that I should. And of course, zooming in would have been the right thing to do here. Now I'm going to go ahead and bring in one of my favorite filters, and that's the sun rays filter. So let's go ahead and scroll back up here to Creative, and we'll click on Sun Rays. Now, out of the box, the sun ray filter is a little bit too much, but let's go ahead and tweak it to make our image work. The first thing I want to do is place the sun where I think it should naturally be. So I'll click on Place Sun Center, and I'm going to have it come right out here to the corner of the mountain, right about there, I think, just peeking over the mountain. It kind of implies that the sun is hitting her, on her face over here, and I have a strong light on her shoulders. So let's go ahead and work with that. And once I've positioned it, I'm going to start adjusting it. So the first thing I want to do is I want to warm up the sun. I want this to be more of an afternoon glow. And I'm going to warm up the light rays. And since it's already positioned, let me go ahead and remove that little circle. I'll just click on Place Sun Ray Center again. And now we actually have our sun. And I'm going to reduce its radius just so it's small enough to peek right over the mountain. So I just want that little glint of sunlight. And I can adjust how these sun rays work. So I'm going to go ahead and move the look slider to the left, and that just makes it a little more subtle. I want fewer sun rays, and I actually want them to penetrate deeper into my image. So I'm going to move that to the right. Now this is a good start. I might have pulled it back a little bit too much, but the magic in working with sun rays is once you get it where you like it, go ahead and paint in the sun rays exactly where you want to hit. And then you don't have to worry about these extra sun rays going into the sky, and this will look a lot more natural. So I'm going to once again click on that brush, and in this case I want to paint it in, so I'm going to make sure I'm on paint. And now I'm going to go ahead and just paint in the sun rays, and let me make my cursor a little bit bigger by hitting the right bracket key. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just paint these sun rays so they just kind of come across and strike her and the foreground, and I'm not going to get a lot in the sky. So once I have that done, I can click that off, and this is without the sun rays, and this is with the sun rays. And I really like the effect. You notice it's not only affecting the mountain, but it affects the whole image as I click it on and off. And the last thing I want to do is I want to fix some of the image. I want to go ahead and maybe erase those boaters in the right side, and I want to restore the rest of the dock here in the lower right-hand corner. Remember, earlier on in the webinar, I actually changed the whole perspective of this image, and part of the image bent to where I didn't actually have any part of that dock. But we're going to fix that with the Clone and Stamp tool. So you can find the Clone and Stamp tool underneath the Tools drop-down menu. I'm going to simply click on Clone and Stamp. And what Luminar will do, it'll prepare my image so that I can just focus on what I want to replace. And the way the Clone and Stamp tool works is I can very easily select the area that I want to copy from, and then I simply use my brush and I paint over into the new area. So as you can see, it says click to set source. And I'm going to just extend the dock from over here. So I'm going to just click on an arbitrary area, maybe about right here. And so now that is what I'm going to paint with my brush as I go lower in the screen. And I'm just going to line up my brush just so that the horizontal line of the dock lines up with the horizontal line in the foreground of the dock. And I'm just going to start painting. And bring that over. I'm going to get the water. And it's just copying what's above. And I can do this, and I can do this pretty quick and subtly. There we go, and voila, the dock has now been replaced. I'm happy with that, so I'm going to go ahead and click on Done. Now, when we return back to the interface, you see there's a brand new layer called Clone and Stamp, and that's the layer where I've fixed the dock. As a matter of fact, if I turn that off, you can see the space that we had earlier. But let's go ahead and turn that on, and I want to show you how to use the Erase tool. So let's go back to the Tools drop-down menu and choose Erase. Once again, Luminar is preparing the image for erasing. And the difference between Erase versus Clone and Stamp is in Clone and Stamp, you select the source area that you want to paint over the new area. But in the case of Erase, all you have to do is select the object you want it to remove, and Luminar will look at the surrounding pixels and erase that object. Let's go ahead and erase those guys on the boat on the right side of the image. Now, all I have to do is draw over this. I'm going to, once again, make my brush a little bit smaller. I'm going to use that left bracket. And I'm just going to paint over where these boats are. Okay. And as soon as I click on Erase up here in the upper center, Luminar is now going to calculate what should be there if the boats aren't and replace it with the nearby area of the water. And it's pretty impressive. As a matter of fact, let me go ahead and clean up a couple things that are bothering me. I want to get rid of this button right here. And if I needed to, I could zoom in just using my mouse and be a little more precise. So let me go ahead and hit undo and just cover over the button. And if I was really picky, I could go here and there's lots of little flecks on the water, and I could go through and just simply click on any of these flecks. As a matter of fact, it might have even been raining a little bit when I took this picture. So we might have just some water droplets there. But there's an example of me selecting some of the drops. I'm going to click on Erase. You'll notice that the button disappears as well as the flecks of water that I highlighted. It does a really nice job. I can go ahead and hit Command or Control 0, zoom my image back to fit the screen. I'll just fix a couple more of these spots, and then we'll hop out of this. So there's the last few spots. I'm going to simply click Done at this point. Luminar is going to fix those last 3 areas with the Erase tool, and we'll be back in our interface in just a moment. So as you can see, the button's gone, the boaters are gone, some of the flecks in the water are gone. I'm pretty happy with my image. You know, in real life, I'd probably spend some more time cleaning up those mountains. But let's take a look at my original image that I started with. I'm going to simply click on the Quick Preview button on top. So that's where we started, and that's where we ended up. And I'm really happy with this, considering we kind of knocked this out in about an hour. Sometimes I like to go split screen so I have a better sense of things. And as you can see, we fixed the proportions, and we really punched up that image. So now that I'm happy with it, I'm ready to export the image. All I have to do is go up under the File menu, select Export, and as you can see in this pop-up window, I have a bunch of choices that I can make. First of all, I can choose the format. So obviously, this is a TIFF file. The great thing about TIFF files is I can save them as an 8-bit or a 16-bit TIFF, which means I have greater color depth, which is nice so I don't have any banding in my sky. I can also choose to save it as a JPEG. And if I choose to save it as a JPEG, I can select the quality. And as you can see, there's a variety of different formats that I can save my image to. Let's go ahead, save this as a JPEG because we want to upload this, say, to a social media site. I'll keep my quality at 85, and I can rename this if I want. We'll call this Olivia at the Lake. And I simply click Save. And there you have it, my final image. Well, with that, I'm going to hand this back to Laurie, who will tell you some places where you can find additional materials, previous webinars, where you can find those keyboard shortcuts. Thanks a lot, and here you go, Laurie.
Alrighty, so you should be able to see my screen. We are on the Skylum website, and this is where you're going to find all things Luminar and also Aurora related as well. So I'm going to take you through a couple spots that I think will be handy for you folks to see. If you go to skylum.com and just under this menu, this drop-down menu, you can actually sign up for an account. And what this will enable us to do is send you a monthly Skylum newsletter. This will give you some tips, some upcoming webinars, information that you might want as far as updates and upgrades to software. So that's a really nice thing to have. Plus you'll get access to a few more things. So you might want to make sure you have an account. And it also keeps tabs of your software. So if you ever lose your license or anything like that, you can go back in there. Under the Luminar 2018 section here, this is just general information that you can go to. But I'm going to scroll down to the bottom here. There are some charts that I find might be useful, especially for some of the questions that we had regarding PC versus Mac. You can click on this compare button, and this will bring up a chart for you. And the parity is really close between Luminar Mac and PC at this time. So you can see maybe there's Photoshop Elements plugin is not applicable for the PC version, but almost everything else is. So there's a few charts there that might be of interest to some of you. Now I do want to show you here what I go to and use quite often is the user guide. And this is something that Abba had said, finding keyboard shortcuts. So I'm going to show you where to find those. But this is a really great tutorial. If you're on Mac, just click on Mac. If you're on Windows, click on Windows. But this will show you everything you ever wanted to know about filters. I mean, each and every slider, excuse me, plus there's a few more information things there as well. So you might want to check that out. Now, as far as keyboard shortcuts on both the Mac and Windows here, you can click on the keyboard shortcut link. Now, the keyboard shortcuts might be a little bit different, so you want to make sure you have the appropriate one selected. And here's where you can find some of the more common ones that you might use every day. You can print this out or just leave it up here. Maybe if you have another monitor, you can just leave that there for a while, depending on how much you want to learn about using these keyboard shortcuts, which are very handy. Okay, we also have an education section. We're actually redoing this whole section here, but you can find lots of information about everything from photography to Aurora and Luminars or webinars. If you click on Luminar, these are Luminar specific, but we have lots of information here that could be really helpful to you learning about different things about Luminar as well. And then last but not least, I want to take you back to our webinars and events section. This is probably where you signed up for webinars, but we have upcoming webinars, plus we have some past events. So for instance, this webinar is recorded and we will be posting it within the next couple of days. If you want to go back and watch it, you can. We've also done several other basic Luminar webinars here if you want to take a look at that, but that is available to you as well. Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for watching with us, and we hope that you join us for another webinar soon. We really appreciate you all, and we really want you to use your Luminar software to the best of its abilities and give you some really great results. So I really want to thank everyone. Thank you, Abba, for a great presentation, and we hope that you have a great day. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.